best I'll do is to remove one of them so that I still have one on. And just to say that I have taken note of the assignment as given by Dr. Nankuma, and to also say that she said one thing which is extremely important, and I want to amplify this a little. She said food is important. And what I didn't hear her say was whether food equals nsima. And that's now mindset change. Dr. Thomas Muntali, the Director General of the National Planning Commission, Mr. Harry Chima, the Managing Executive, the Worth Magazine, Mr. Philip Madinga, CEO from Standard Bank, Dr. Candida Nankuma, Country Director of the Foundation for a Smoke-Free World, and the ATI, Your Lordship, Justice Dr. Chifundo Kachali, the Chairperson of the Electoral Commission, Ms. Martha Chizuma, the Director General at the Anti-Corruption Bureau, all panelists, chief executive officers that are present here, both physically and virtually, all government officials that are here with us, distinguished invited guests, members of the Fourth Estate, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. With great pleasure, I join you this evening to this inaugural annual Chief Executive Officers Forum. Let me start by thanking the Wealth Magazine and other stakeholders for organizing this important forum this evening. I am delighted to see progress being made by Wealth Magazine in advancing our country's inclusive wealth creation and self-reliance agenda. The event wouldn't have come at a better time than now, when you, as chief executive officers and leaders, are being called upon to make your companies assume their rightful role in this economy. The theme of the forum, which is titled Transcending the Economic Turbulence Through Private Sector-Led Growth, gives an insight of what we should expect this evening. The theme has been well complemented by the presentations that we have just listened to. My address will focus on 4 domains. First, I will try to stimulate discussion by highlighting the role that both the public and private sector can play to help our economy sail through the economic turbulence that in recent times has been largely worsened by COVID-19. Second, I'll touch on the global framework for understanding national wealth and how Malawi's wealth status relates to that framework. Number 3, as we all may recall, His Excellency the President, Dr. Lazarus Makathi Chakwera, launched the MW 2063 as a blueprint for national development in Malawi. I will therefore highlight how the MW 2063 proposes to create wealth in an equitable and inclusive manner. And last, which is number 4, I will then conclude my speech with a direct engagement with you CEOs, especially on personal sacrifices that we as leaders can make to help our organizations sail through the turbulence as you facilitate private sector's contribution to the MW 2063 aspirations, and this is being said to you because as leaders, the buck stops with you. And therefore, to talk a little bit about private sector and the public sector, it has been said before, and others have already alluded to the point, that the private sector is the engine for economic growth. Further, others will say the public sector is the oil for that engine to run. As we all learned from our early school years, under a biological concept called symbiosis, it should therefore transcend our minds that the gravity and magnitude of the relationship between these two ends, i.e. the private sector and the public sector, should inevitably take a similar form for coexistence, survival, and growth. We should call that mutualism. However, for desired results, this should be done within the framework of the current national development agenda. The point really is that the public and the private sector need each other to grow the economy and sail through any economic turbulence. In a nutshell, a mutually beneficial relationship is what must exist. To begin with, it is important to understand that land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship are the key factors of production in this, and indeed any country. For this reason, government implores the private sector to intensify mobilization of finance, both from local and foreign sources, if we are to sail through this turbulence. For example, the private sector players can leverage on the stock market, crowdfunding, banks, and even pension funds, which keep growing exponentially. The point really is that the private sector has a role to play to mobilize capital within and outside Malawi, develop modern technology, as well as support national transformation. It is a fact that Malawi is said to be an agro-based economy, but it is a labor-based economy too. Unfortunately, very few people are contributing to the economic production and to tax revenue. A bit of statistics. From the 2018 population and housing census, it is shown that of the 17.5 million people, as at 2018, about half, which is 9.2 or thereabout, or 52.3%, were in the productive age group, which is 15 to 64. Further, the report also showed that only 6% that were actually employed. We cannot expect development where nearly 62% are not producing and are not contributing to tax revenue. Therefore, as private sector, transcending the economic turbulence requires that the private sector and the government create work for those who are economically active but have no jobs. Once we do this, we will grow the GDP, we will expand the tax revenue base, we will increase the number of people with buying power, and we will increase your customer base as a private sector, including the public sector. The country's national development blueprint, the MW 2063, which you should all be familiar with by now, has private sector dynamism as one of the 7 enablers. I'll turn on to the framework for national wealth. In the year 2006, the World Bank published estimates of 120 countries' total worth in an attempt to introduce a broader view of what assets constitute national wealth beyond the commonly used gross domestic product, GDP. The report classified a country's capital and worth into three main types: A, natural capital; B, produced or physical capital; and C, intangible capital. Natural capital generally refers to endowments of nature that a country has. Produced capital is what has traditionally been defined as physical capital in economics. These two are then considered tangible capital. Intangible capital is defined as a combination of human capital and the quality of formal and informal institutions. In that study, a striking pattern emerged. The global average national wealth per capita was around $95,860. While the share of produced assets or physical capital in total wealth was virtually constant across income groups of those countries, the share of national capital trends actually tend to fall with income, and the share of intangible capital rises. In other words, rich countries are rich largely because of the skills of their populations and the quality of the institutions that support economic activity. In the same study, Malawi's wealth per capita was estimated at $5,200, consisting $785 in natural capital, $542 in produced or physical capital, and the balance, $3,873 of intangible capital. In other words, therefore, even for Malawi, contrary to what Malawians believe, natural capital accounts for only 15% of Malawi's worth, while the intangible capital accounts for 74% and physical capital accounting for 10% of the national wealth per capita. So in essence, intangible capital is the largest component of global and Malawi's national wealth. And therefore, to dive a little bit into intangible capital and Malawi's wealth creation, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our interaction this evening comes at a time when we as a people and a nation have made a deliberate and collective resolution to actively change and control the development trajectory of Malawi through a commitment to inclusive wealth creation and self-reliance as espoused under the MW 2063. As we set out on the journey to the year 2063, I encourage each one of us to collectively and individually consider ourselves as an important and productive element of the self in self-reliance that will propel the implementation and realization of our vision. The self in self-reliance refers to all of us as critical stakeholders, covering the government, private sector, and our people. As a sector, therefore, we need to reflect on how we, as a critical element of the self, can reorganize and use our productive capacities to optimally and systematically contribute to the concrete realization of our collective aspirations. Ladies and gentlemen, the Malawi 2063 is premised on three main pillars, namely, and I'll be calling them out in brief, not as they are: agriculture, industry, and last, urbanization. These pillars are to be supported by 7 enablers, namely mindset change, effective governance institutions and systems, enhanced public sector performance, private sector dynamism, economic infrastructure, human capital development, and last, the environment. environmental sustainability. The MW 2063 sets an important milestone to be attained as early as 2030, where we hope to see this country graduating to a lower middle income economy. The vision's ecosystem of the 3 pillars and 7 enablers are the conduits for meeting this goal. The specific details of how we will meet this milestone have been articulated in the Malawi 2063 first 10-year plan, which we have christened the Malawi Implementation Plan number 1, abbreviated MIP1. And this will be launched soon after we have gone all through the approval that is required before we can launch and start implementation. I therefore encourage you to join the government in productively exploring and exploiting the gold mine that is the MIP1. The MIP1 is the first in a series of the vision implementation plans that will operationalize the implementation and realization of our collective aspirations. The theme of our interaction this evening provokes the question: how well positioned are you, the private sector, to propel MW 2063, and better still, in helping this country graduate into a lower middle income economy within the shortest time possible, and of course, while transcending the turbulence. I believe that the private sector occupies a privileged and enviable position in relation to the implementation and realization of the aspirations as espoused in the MW 2063. Looking at the profiles of the entities that are represented here, I have no doubt that all of us and the interests that we represent fall in at least one of those pillars we called out. Within and amongst us, therefore, lies the answer to that question. Tapping on your experience and mastery of the dynamics of investment, business, and markets, and privileged position as potential investors in productive and bankable enterprises, I would like to personally encourage you to join the government and the people of Malawi in laying the foundations for the implementation and realization of the Malawi 2063 by participating in the following areas. Number 1, creation of a vibrant digital economy, including available and accessible digitized learning, banking, trade, and private or public sector service provision, as brought to the fore by the COVID-19 pandemic. We simply cannot continue with the traditional conceptualization of learning, investment, business, and markets. We must, as a matter of urgency, devise the means of growing, prospering, and flourishing in spite of such shocks and other phenomena that have potential of delaying our corrective efforts. Second, provision of productive grants and investments in the Malawi 2063 oriented innovation, research, and development. Third, provision of competitive and productive loans to finance bankable projects, ideas, and businesses along the MW 2063 pillars and enablers. 4, investment in strategic sectors investment in strategic sectors that will accelerate attainment of our self-reliance agenda, like the following: mining, processing of raw materials and manufacturing, energy, ICT, and strategic transport networks. And finally, investment in the development of appropriate human resource and human resource management systems to support the implementation and realization of the aspirations of the Malawi 2063. A concerted and committed government effort and private sector focusing on the few areas above, executed under proven frameworks such as the public-private partnerships, among others, would significantly contribute to the unlocking and energizing of the innate and mostly untapped development potential of our country, Malawi. As a government, we stand ready to partner with the private sector in nurturing and maximizing the productive potential of our country under the framework of the MW 2063. Distinguished business leaders, as government, we will continue to provide, nurture, and safeguard the necessary environment for the private sector, markets, and businesses to thrive in a manner that sensibly optimizes profits while inclusively creating wealth for our people for generations to come. Government will continue to avail itself as an effective and a reliable partner in productive alliances with the private sector in execution of the MW 2063 oriented investments, especially in areas that have been identified under the MIP1 as game changers, quick wins, and flagship projects. In addition, government commits to maintain peace and political stability, functioning democratic institutions, and promote constant dialogue with the private sector and parastate organizations on their contribution to the national objectives. Last, my message to the CEOs. As I indicated earlier, allow me to now engage you as CEOs, whether from the public sector or indeed the private sector, because you are the people who can make things happen. I was going to say happen or not, but here we are not discussing any failure. We're talking about making things happen. And Mr. Madinga talked about being candid. Let me borrow a leaf. As leaders and CEOs, it is important for you to pick priorities right. As per the theme of this forum, surviving or sailing through economic turbulence, this requires that leaders have a knack for knowing what to take on, choices and priorities. Great CEOs also know what to give up. As a matter of fact, true leaders make sacrifices and forgo things employees don't, shouldn't, and wouldn't. I have seen great leaders make many sacrifices over my career. I've also seen leaders refuse to give up things that the mantle of great leadership demands they give up. Dismissing such sacrifices often negatively affected their careers. One author, Scott Maltz, the author of Find the Fire, once said, I quote, "Leadership is about what you give up, not what you take in," end quote. Two of the things that we as leaders must not hesitate to give up are self-interest and greed. Instead of self-interest, we must make sacrifices. An example, in the Presidential Benefits Act, a vice president, and not this one, any for that matter, is by statutory obligation required to travel abroad on a fully funded vacation, full, with all frills. But given the situation that we have right now in this country, I do not think that any wise or sensible person occupying that office would travel on a holiday. That is a demonstration of sacrifice. This is not about me. I am talking about any vice president. In the same spirit, how would we look at a CEO who is presiding over a parastatal, or indeed in the case of a private sector organization that is bleeding and not making profits, but yet they get full benefits? They want to drive the most expensive vehicles, Land Cruiser VX and Prados and so on. And I've got nothing against those vehicles. I'm speaking to the CEOs. As leaders, we should be the first ones to take the bullet. It shouldn't be the case. And if I might cite, let me cite this by way of example. The CEO of a parastatal that is commercially oriented should not necessarily drive the same vehicle over a fully subvented parastatal. Then we need to go to Zomba General, not the General Hospital, but the other one, for mental examination. Because that surely makes no sense. So finally, as you do your work, remember that as CEOs, it actually stops on your table. Depending on your leadership style, you can build and inspire a great team to work with you, to turn around your organization, and this is for your introspection. The other thing I wanted to share with you is that as leaders, we must always resist the temptation to block our management teams from succeeding or empowering them with further training. We talk about human development. This is the responsibility of good chief executives to make sure that we have quality human resource. As others would say, human resource is the single biggest competitive advantage of any organization over another. Let me conclude by leaving you with the following 4 things, I think. Number 1, accept that things need to change and they need to change now, and we all have a role to play. We need to do things different, promote mindset change, both in the private sector and indeed in the public sector. Second, let's align our investments with national priorities and systematically contribute to generating resources for national development. Number 3, the government commits to and will invest in creating a conducive environment for businesses to thrive so that we can together see the country move to a lower middle income economy by the year 2030. And last, when all is said and done, the MW 2063 has borne fruits, policy shifts, and in line with MW 2063 have made the fiscus richer, following on returns on investments in sectors like mining, agriculture, and tourism, and of course the need for borrowing from the financial sector where government has subsidized or subsided. How prepared will the financial sector or the private sector in general be to reposition themselves, especially in a situation where this largest source or where the largest source of their income no longer requires much from them? I think Dr. Nankuma touched on something like this. And very, very finally, I want to leave us with the following 3 things. Number 1, get involved. No spectators. We profess different religious beliefs, and we call ourselves a God-fearing nation as Malawi. God-fearing as we may be, and we can fear God all we want, but we must get involved. If we want a very clear illustration of how God asked Moses to get involved, Genesis 14, verse 15, all the way to Genesis chapter 15, verse 1. This is where God told Moses, "Why are you crying to me? You have that staff in your hand, point to the sea, so these people can cross. Get involved. For you to cross, you must walk. God is not going to walk on your behalf." So we need to get involved as a people. People are talking about COVID-19, vaccinations, masks, hygiene. We can bring vaccines all we want, whether it is government, it is donors, it is private sector. We are not going to get vaccinated on behalf of other people. Everybody needs to get involved. Go and get vaccinated. Wear your own mask. I'm wearing my own. I'm not going to wear one on your behalf. Sanitize your own hands. Be hygienic. I won't do it on your behalf. Let's get involved. When we go out there to get vaccinations, don't focus on biceps. Focus on the vaccine. Go and get vaccinated. Don't worry about the biceps. Worry about the vaccines. Number 3, to get involved, even the food that we revere the most, nsima. Probably the only 2 times we pray is we pray to ask God to give us good rains and to give us good health. Beyond that, get involved. You can pray all you want, you can fast all you want. Nsima will not appear on its own. You've got to set the fire. You've got to have the smoke right there. Get bent. That's when you're going to eat nsima. Get involved. And I think we should also start sanitizing our minds and our hearts as a country. Not just the hands. We need to sanitize in here, over here, so that we move forward with sincerity. Not what we see today, our obsession with trivia. And very, very finally, never give up. We must continue, not just to have a faith, but to get involved with the belief that the God who created us never drew that map on our behalf and said, lo and behold, Malawians, there is poverty for you. It was never meant to be the case. Let's get involved. Let's never give up. Let's continue to have the faith and keep moving forward. I thank you for your attention. You have a good evening.